We have more factoring to work on this week. Last week, we looked at two methods for factoring. One, using the greatest common factor, and two, factoring by grouping. In this lecture, we want to look at factoring quadratic trinomials. Now, when we're talking about a quadratic trinomial, we're talking about three terms. Specifically in this form, ax squared plus bx plus c. So whenever we have that x squared, we know we are looking at a quadratic. The three terms are trinomials, and in this case, a, b, and c are going to be real numbers. Before we factor, let's review binomial multiplication. We have 2x plus 3 times x minus 5. So we're going to say 2x times the second bracket plus 3 times the second bracket. Use the distributive property to open our brackets. And then combine like terms. Let's take a minute and look more closely at that trinomial. We can see where the 2x squared comes from. It comes from multiplying the first two terms. 2x times x gives us 2x squared. We can see where the minus 15 comes from. It comes from multiplying the last two terms, plus 3 times negative 5. But how do we get that middle term? How do we figure out that we need a positive 3x and a minus 10x? That's what we want to talk about here. So we're going to take this trinomial and factor it. So we're starting with 2x squared minus 7x minus 15. And remember, when you're asked to factor, we're always looking for a product. What are we multiplying to give us this trinomial? Well, we already know in this case, but we're going to work backwards. So the first thing we want is a, b, c, and a times c. Most often when students come to me because they're having difficulty with factoring, it's because they don't write this step down. So please, while you're learning, write it down. We see here that a equals 2, b equals negative 7, c equals negative 15. Now, you remember those sums and product worksheets. I talked about them in the lectures. Last week, I talked about them in the lectures at the beginning of the semester. I hope you've been practicing them because we're going to use that idea now of sums and products. We want two numbers that have a product of a times c and that have a sum of b. So in the case of this question, two numbers that have a product of a times c, that's negative 30, and a sum of b, or negative 7. Remember what we said about those sheets. If you don't know what the numbers are, you're going to want to list the factors of your product. So we're going to list the factors of 30 in pairs. One times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6. I hope you see that if we're subtracting, 3 and 10 can give us a 7. We need these to multiply to negative 30. That means one of them needs to be negative. We need them to add to -7. That tells us that 10 needs to be negative. So we're going to use those two numbers to rewrite the middle term. So we have 3 and -10, and we're going to use the 3 and -10 to rewrite this term. So we keep the 2x squared. We use +3, and there's an x there because it has to equal -7x, and the -10. So those two terms give us -7x minus 15. Now we just have to factor by grouping. I hope you were practicing that after last week. We see that x is common here. -5 is common here. So x multiplies 2x plus 3. Divide each term by x. -5 multiplies 2x plus 3. We see that 2x plus 3 is common. And we're left with our quotient x minus 5. And we can go back and see that that's what we started with, 2x plus 3 times x minus 5. Remember that we have to have a product here. No adding and subtracting. We're multiplying two terms. But we can always check our answers. You should never have a wrong factoring question on your test. You can always check by multiplying what you've written. Now, if you are checking, make sure you tell me that's what you're doing. Otherwise, sometimes people just go backwards for no reason. So to check, we're going to multiply 2x times the second term plus 3 times the second term. And you can see that our product here is the same as the product we started with, or sorry, the trinomial we started with. The only thing to do now is practice. So here are some questions. You should get out some paper and start working on these. Okay, let's take a look at the work we have here for these first three questions. I hope you were able to factor them correctly. In the first place, we wrote down our values for A, B, and C. But remember, we're trying to find two numbers that multiply to equal A times C for each of these. A times C, and don't forget your negative signs. That's a pretty common error here. So two numbers always that multiply to equal A times C, and then add to equal B. Once we've found those numbers, we use those numbers. So in this case, it was 6 times -3, or sorry, 3 times -6. We use the 3 and the -6. Now people ask, does the order matter? It doesn't. Let me show you here quickly that we could have used these in the other order. We could have had x squared plus 3x minus 6x minus 18. X is common here. Minus 6 is common here. You see now we have x plus 3 common, multiplying the quotient x minus 6. It gives us the same answer because in multiplication, order doesn't matter. I'm going to get you to pause your video again and try the next three questions. Okay, Again, we wrote down our numbers for A, B, and C. We found two numbers that multiplied to give us A times C and that added to equal B. And then we factored by grouping. This process can take some practice, some time, because you don't want it to be a slow one for you. Let's do one more together, and then I encourage you to go to the class Moodle page and do some of the practice that's there. Let's try question 8. In question 8, we see that A is 6, B is -5, C is -4. Two numbers that multiply to equal A times C and that add to equal B. We can list the factors of 24 in pairs. As soon as I get to 3 times 8, I can see that those will give me the 5 that I'm looking for. We want a product of -24. That means one of them has to be negative. We want a sum of -5, so we know the 8 has to be negative. We're going to use those numbers to find our middle term. 6x squared, we have a +3. Make sure you remember your x, and a -8, because of course we want those to equal that middle term. And then we factor by grouping. 3x is common in the first group. -4 is common in the second group. Keep your greatest common factor. Divide both terms. 6x squared divided by 3x. 3x divided by 3x. Write down your greatest common factor again. -8x divided by -4. 2x. -4 divided by -4 plus 1. We see that 2x plus 1 is common. Multiplied by the quotient 3x minus 4. One last question for you. Pause your video, do question 9. Here's the workings for that last one. We've written down A, B, and C, found our two numbers for the sum and product. We rewrote the middle term plus 5x using +8 and -3.